Hey there, did you know you do not need a special macro lens to capture rings on a wedding day? As a wedding photographer, it's a lot of money to shell out to buy one lens that you really only use just to photograph rings on a wedding day. So in this video, I'm going to tell you some tips for how to photograph wedding rings without a macro lens. Hi there, I'm Nicole and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new, I'm a wedding photographer in Toronto and I've been shooting weddings for the past 10 years. I love photographing wedding day details. And although I don't think they're the most important photos on your wedding day, I do think that if you can photograph them well, it can elevate the look of your photography, and photos of details look beautiful when they're in a wedding album. A lot of wedding photographers have macro lenses that they use for photographing the wedding rings. And I think macro lenses are great, but they're expensive. And becoming a wedding photographer, investing in all the equipment is so much money that I'm always trying to save money wherever I can. So in order for me to photograph wedding rings, what I do is I use an extension tube set. The set that I use, it has 3 extension tubes that are connected to each other. You can mix them and match them to get a variety of looks. And it's from a company called Kenko. I think it was around $100 for this, and I'll link it below so you can check it out. This macro extension tube goes between the camera lens and the body. It moves the lens away from the body. And what this does is it allows you to focus on smaller things like wedding rings. It takes time to set up this extension tube, so once you have it on your camera, you will not be able to focus far away on people. And you'll only really be limited to focusing things close up. So I like to take photos of the rings during the getting ready period when the bride is getting the final touches on her makeup. This is like a slower part of the day, so I can take my time taking the ring shots, and I can take a break from taking the photos of people so that I can get this done. Also, usually the bride is getting ready during the day, like around noon or so, when the sun is shining. And at that point of the day, I can use window light to light my rings. Also, I like to take all the detail shots in the same room on a similar backdrop so that all the photos have a cohesive look. That way, when you put the photos together in a wedding album, they will kind of match each other and it will look really nice in a spread. I use one of my portrait lenses with the extension tube. There's no need to buy an additional lens. That's the beauty of this. So I like to use my 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 lens with the extension tube. Also, I like getting a lot of natural light, so I usually set up the rings right near a window. It's really important to make sure that the surface that you're using is really clean, because when you take pictures with this extension tube, it's going to magnify everything and any dirt is going to be very noticeable in your pictures. So make sure you just take your time to clean off the surface. It's also helpful if the rings have been cleaned beforehand, because if the ring is dirty, it'll be obvious in the photos. Then I make sure to set up my camera so that I've got the appropriate settings so that the rings will be sharp and that I'm letting in the maximum amount of light. So I usually set my shutter speed to 1/160. I find that for me, that shutter speed is fast enough to eliminate any camera shake. So that helps me get a nice sharp image. When you have the extension tube on your camera body, the depth of field is very different. It becomes extremely thin. So if you were using like a 50 millimeter lens and you had f2.8, normally you'd be able to get the things in focus with that aperture, but with the extension tube, that would be like razor thin. It would be like tiny. So for me to make sure that I get the rings in focus, I recommend an aperture between f4 to f8. That usually works for me. A higher aperture will give you greater depth of field, and it will give you greater assurance that your rings will be in focus. After I set up the shutter speed and aperture, then I move on to the ISO and I set whatever ISO is necessary to get the correct exposure. I find if it's like a pretty bright day and I'm right by a window, the ISO I end up with is usually between 800 to 1600. Another tip that's really important when photographing rings, if you want all 3 rings in focus, like if they're in a line, for example, make sure that the bands are all resting on the same plane of focus. When I do this, I make sure that I line up the rings carefully And I usually take a few test shots and just zoom in on the LCD screen to ensure that everything looks sharp. There's a few different ways that I like to set up the rings. One way is to line the rings up, like I mentioned before, so that's kind of nice. Another option is to have all three rings together and interlocked. This one is kind of tricky to set up. Once you get it set up and stable, it looks really nice. Usually when I have the ring set up like that, I shoot it at about f4.0 and I focus in on the diamond, and then everything else kind of blurs out in the image. There are a few things you can set that on. Like if I have a ring box, you can set those rings on a ring box and it looks really nice. Or you could set those rings on a flower within the bouquet. I usually try to find a flower that has like a flatter surface and somewhere where I can actually rest the rings on. Also, if you have an invitation, it looks really nice if you set the rings up on that as well. I like to get a few simple shots to start with, and then after I have that, I'll personalize it and add in different elements from the wedding just to have some variety. I find taking the ring shots this way is simple, it's relatively easy, there's not much setup time, so you can do it quickly and you can get great results. I hope this video was helpful and you got some good ideas and inspiration on how you could photograph wedding rings. If you would like to see more videos like this one, please hit the like button and please subscribe to my channel for more content. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.